December 13th, 1943. High above northwestern Germany, near the long road to Bremen, and beyond it the deeper air corridors leading toward the Reich. The sky is hard and white with cold. At more than 20,000 feet, the air outside is a killing thing, thin enough to starve a man of breath, cold enough to freeze exposed flesh in moments. Vapor streams from hundreds of engines in long chalk lines across the morning, and beneath them the bomber formation moves east in rigid geometry. Box after box of American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, silver and olive drab, heavy with fuel, bombs, and men who have done this often enough to know exactly what happens when the escort turns back too soon. But today, something is different. Ahead of the bombers, above them, sliding out on the flanks and weaving behind, there are fighters that are not supposed to be here this deep. Sleek, narrow, almost elegant compared to the brutal bulk of the four-engine bombers, the North American P-51 Mustangs move with an ease that seems unnatural at this altitude. Their laminar flow wings cut through the freezing air. Their Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, built under license by Packard, give off a sound unlike the radial throb of the bombers. A higher, harder note, smooth and predatory, like steel drawn across glass. In one of those Mustangs, Lieutenant Charles "Chuck" Weaver of the 354th Fighter Group glances over his shoulder and sees what bomber crews had prayed to see for months. Not the final wave of escorts turning for home over the Dutch coast. Not the lonely horizon opening toward Germany with nothing between the fortresses and the Luftwaffe. He sees fighters still with them, still there, still climbing, still ranging ahead. Below him, in a B-17 of the 100th Bomb Group, a waist gunner watches the Mustangs slide past and feels a kind of disbelief too dangerous to trust. The bombermen had learned not to hope too much. They had flown into Europe behind the promise of daylight precision bombing and the theory that tight formations and heavy defensive guns could break any fighter attack. Then they had seen Schweinfurt. They had seen Regensburg. They had watched Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s slash through the boxes, watched rockets burst, watched fortresses peel out of formation, trailing fire and pieces of wing. They had learned what unescorted really meant. Now the escort is still here, and Germany is still ahead. Far to the east, on a Luftwaffe field slick with frost, ground crews move around a line of fighters as pilots climb into cockpits and pull gloves tight. The alarm has already gone out. American bombers inbound. Strong escort. The words matter. By late 1943, every experienced German pilot understands that the enemy is changing, but not all of them yet understand how completely. Among them is a Staffelkapitän in Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with enough victories to know the air war's old rhythm by instinct. For years, the pattern had been familiar. British bombers by night, American bombers by day. Escorts at the edge of the Reich and over occupied Europe, yes. Spitfires, Thunderbolts, Lightnings, dangerous certainly, but limited. Range had always been the quiet ally of Germany's defenders. The bombers could come deep into the Reich, but their fighter cover could not always stay with them. Sooner or later, the escorts turned home. Then the American heavies flew on alone, and that was the moment to strike. It had become doctrine, timing, patience. Let the bombers advance. Let them burn fuel. Let the escorts thin out. Then hit the combat wing with everything available. Head-on passes to exploit the bombers' weak frontal defense, rocket attacks to break formation, coordinated slashing attacks by single-engine fighters to overwhelm the gunners by speed and angle. Costly, yes. Brutal, yes. But possible. The new reports are less comforting. Mustangs over Emden. Mustangs over Hamburg approaches. Mustangs over targets once considered safely inside the zone where German fighters could concentrate against bombers alone. The first reaction in some briefing rooms had been skepticism. Another American fighter. Another claim. Another machine the enemy hoped would solve a problem that training, tactics, and courage had not yet solved. German pilots had seen many Allied types arrive with a reputation larger than their reality. They knew the Spitfire's strengths, respected the P-47's dive, distrusted the P-38's concentrated firepower, but none of those aircraft had yet truly erased the geography that protected the Reich's heart. The P-51 seemed, at first glance, too clean, too light, almost too refined for the rough arithmetic of the escort war. Some pilots dismissed it as just another Begleitjäger, another escort fighter to be dealt with by altitude, discipline, and experience. Some mocked the American need to invent yet another answer to the same problem. In the mess halls and dispersal huts, the confidence still survived that whatever came over Germany could be handled the way it had always been handled, by waiting, climbing, and striking when the heavy bombers were exposed. Then the encounters began. Not at the coast alone, not only on withdrawal. The Mustangs were appearing where they were not supposed to appear, and they were not merely shepherding bombers. They were hunting, roaming ahead of the formations, sweeping airfields, climbing aggressively into interception lanes, diving on assembling German fighters before the attacks on the bombers could even begin. Their range altered more than the map. It altered the tempo of battle. Suddenly, the Luftwaffe was being engaged before it could shape the fight on its own terms. Up ahead, the bomber stream continues east, engines droning so steadily that the sound becomes its own kind of pressure. Frost crawls along metal frames. Oxygen masks rise and fall with quickening breath. In the nose compartments, bombardiers study target folders. In the Mustang cockpits, men scan the empty blue with an intensity that makes the eyes ache. Then the radio crackles. Bandits. Multiple. High. 11 o'clock. The old war is still here, but it is about to collide with the new one. For a moment the formation holds, suspended between doctrine and surprise, between the memory of what German pilots expected and the reality now rushing toward them through the freezing sunlight. The bombers maintain course. The Mustangs begin to climb. And over Germany, where American heavy bombers had once seemed most vulnerable, the fighter that many had dismissed is about to prove why the air war over Europe will never be the same again. The climb comes fast. Lieutenant Charles "Chuck" Weaver shoves the throttle forward, and the Packard-built Merlin answers instantly. Not with the heavy, rumbling pull of a bomber engine, but with something sharper, tighter, more alive. The nose of the P-51 lifts into the freezing morning, the fighter climbing hard as the white glare of the winter sky swallows the horizon ahead. Around him, the other Mustangs begin to rise as well, peeling upward in disciplined arcs, each pilot searching the bright emptiness above the bomber stream for the first sign of movement. Below them, the geometry of the American formation begins to change. Inside a B-17 of the 100th Bomb Group, a waist gunner feels that change before he can explain it. The bombers are still holding course. The engines still drone with that deep, relentless rhythm that seems to press against the inside of the skull. But the escorts are no longer merely present. They are moving with intent now, climbing, spreading, repositioning. The calm order of escort has become the tense, deliberate motion of interception. He leans slightly into the freezing slipstream at the open waist window, one gloved hand wrapped around the cold metal frame. His .50 caliber machine gun sits ready in front of him, dark, solid, familiar. He peers upward into the white brilliance of the sky, toward the high 11 o'clock sector where experience tells him the danger will come from. Somewhere out there, almost invisible against the winter light, German fighters are forming. He knows the pattern. Every bomber crewman in the 8th Air Force knows it by now, and that knowledge has been paid for. Only weeks earlier, crews like his had gone into Germany under very different conditions. The promise had sounded logical enough in briefing rooms and operations tents. Daylight precision bombing, tight formations, interlocking defensive guns, mutual protection through discipline and geometry. If the bombers held formation and every gunner stayed sharp, then the combat box, in theory, could defend itself against anything the Luftwaffe sent against it. It was a doctrine built on calculations, diagrams, and confidence. But over Germany, theory had collided with reality. October 14, 1943, the second Schweinfurt mission. Even now, the memory hangs over the bomber force like smoke that never fully clears. B-17s had flown deep into the Reich that day, aiming for the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, targets considered vital to Germany's war industry. It was the kind of mission the Americans believed they had to fly: hard, costly, strategically necessary. Destroy the factories, and the German war machine would begin to seize up from within. But reaching those targets meant going far beyond the distance where escort fighters could safely remain. And as always, the escorts had eventually turned back. That moment had become its own kind of terror in the bomber crew's minds. The point where the last friendly fighters disappeared westward and the bombers kept going alone. Beyond that invisible line, the Luftwaffe had been waiting, not recklessly, not blindly, waiting with patience, waiting with experience, waiting for exactly the moment the bombers were most exposed. Then the attacks came. Messerschmitt Bf-109s drove in head-on, closing so fast that men in the bombers barely had seconds to react. Their attacks were brutally efficient, designed to exploit the weak frontal defense of the heavy bombers. Focke-Wulf Fw-190s joined the assault as well, some firing rockets into the formations to break apart the carefully maintained boxes before sweeping in closer with cannon and machine gun fire. Other fighters slashed in from the flanks and rear, using speed, angle, and coordination to overwhelm even determined gunners. Inside the American formations, men saw the sky become a machine of destruction. They saw aircraft beside them burst into flame with almost no warning. They saw wings torn open, tails twisted, propellers frozen, engines ripped apart. They saw fortresses drift out of formation, trailing smoke, debris, and pieces of aluminum skin, their gunners still firing from doomed aircraft as long as they physically could. Some bombers exploded so suddenly that there was almost nothing left to watch. Others fell more slowly, spiraling downward through cloud and smoke, wounded enough to die, but not yet dead. And for the crews who survived, that memory did not stay behind in October. It came with them. It sat beside them in the briefing room. It followed them out to the hard stands. It climbed into the aircraft with them and settled into every glance, every silence, every check of a machine gun feed, every look toward the horizon when the escort began to thin. The official reports gave numbers: dozens of bombers lost, hundreds of men killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. But numbers were not what the crews remembered most. What they remembered was exposure. Not danger in the abstract, but the physical certainty of being left alone deep inside enemy airspace, knowing that somewhere ahead, German fighters were climbing into position and that no one would reach them first. That is what had defined the old rhythm of the air war over Europe. The bombers went in. The escorts helped where they could. Then range intervened. The fighters turned back, and the bombers flew on into the Reich by themselves. After that, the Luftwaffe could fight the battle on its own terms. That was the pattern the Germans trusted, and it was the pattern the Americans had come to fear. Now, in the freezing air of December, that lesson is alive in every movement inside the B-17. The waist gunner shifts his stance and checks the ammunition feed again, his fingers brushing the cold steel of the receiver. Across the aircraft, other men are doing the same without needing to be told. The tail gunner searches the rear arc. The top turret scans above. Beneath the bomber, the ball turret gunner turns slowly in his cramped glass enclosure, suspended between the empty sky and the earth far below. The bombardier in the nose compartment keeps glancing up from his target materials. No one is relaxed. No one mistakes this for safety. But this time, something is different. This time, they are not waiting alone. Above the bombers, the Mustangs continue to climb. Weaver sees the contacts first as broken motion against the glare, dark shapes crossing the white sky, their contrails fragmenting as they maneuver into attack position. Bf-109s, most likely. Perhaps Fw-190s behind them. At this distance, certainty is impossible, but the formation tells him enough. The German fighters are approaching from high 11 o'clock, setting up exactly the kind of interception they have used before. Altitude for speed, position for surprise. A descent timed to meet the bombers head-on and tear through them before defensive fire can fully settle. The old pattern. Except this time, the timing is wrong. Weaver knows it almost instinctively. The German fighters are too early, too far out. They are committing to the attack before the escorts have turned away, because the escorts have not turned away. For a brief second, in the middle of the cold and the noise and the pressure, the truth becomes startlingly clear. This is what changes everything. He keys the radio, his voice controlled, clipped, professional, calling out the contacts at 11 o'clock high. Other pilots are already seeing the same thing. The response spreads through the formation almost instantly. The bombers do not break. They hold their course. But above and around them, the fighter screen moves from passive cover to active interception. The structure of the American formation becomes layered. The heavies below, the Mustangs above. The airspace ahead no longer surrendered to the enemy by default. Then the P-51s roll into the attack. No hesitation, no waiting for the Germans to make the first pass. The Mustangs drop into a hard, aggressive dive, accelerating with terrifying speed toward the incoming interceptors. In formation, they had looked almost graceful. Now they look like what they were built to be. Not merely escorts, not bodyguards tied to the bomber's wings. Hunters. Below, the waist gunner watches the sky suddenly come alive. Tiny flashes begin to flicker in the distance where guns open fire. Contrails break and twist. The clean lines of approach collapse into a violent weave of turns, dives, reversals, and pursuit. Shapes that had seemed small and remote a second earlier now move with lethal urgency. The Luftwaffe is no longer attacking an isolated bomber stream. It is being intercepted before it can fully execute its own attack. And that has not happened often enough for the crews below to mistake what it means. The German fighters do not reach the bombers first. For the first time on a deep mission into Germany, the opening clash happens away from the bomber formation itself. The head-on passes are disrupted before they fully develop. The carefully coordinated assault begins to fracture. Timing is lost. Angles are spoiled. Whatever plan the German pilots had built in the climb is being stripped apart in seconds by American fighters that were never supposed to be this far inside the Reich. Inside the B-17, the waist gunner keeps his weapon trained upward, still tense, still ready. He knows some enemy aircraft may yet break through. Some always do. The danger is not gone. The mission is not safe. The bombers are still deep over Germany, and Germany is still full of guns, fighters, and fire. But the old certainty, the certainty of abandonment, is gone. Above him, the Mustangs slash through the freezing sunlight in pursuit of diving German fighters. And for the first time, deep over enemy territory, the bombers are no longer simply waiting to be attacked. The fight is being carried outward to meet the enemy. Weaver pulls his Mustang out of the dive, just enough to hold speed without bleeding energy. The Merlin engine answers with a smooth, controlled roar, the aircraft responding instantly, almost effortlessly, as if it were an extension of his own body. Ahead of him, a German fighter breaks formation too early, forced to react instead of attack. And in that single moment, everything becomes clear. The old pattern is gone. But what made this moment possible did not begin here, in the freezing sky over Germany. It began months earlier, far from combat, in design rooms, in test flights, in decisions that, at the time, did not feel like they would change the course of the war. Because the P-51 had not always been this aircraft. The early Mustangs, powered by the Allison engine, showed promise at low altitude. They were fast, efficient, and well handled. But high above Europe, where the real air war was fought, they struggled. At altitude, performance dropped, power faded. And against experienced German pilots flying Bf-109s and FW-190s, that weakness mattered. The Mustang could have remained just another capable but limited fighter. Then came the Merlin. Originally developed in Britain, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine had already proven itself in combat. It powered the Spitfire. It delivered performance where other engines began to fail, at altitude, in thin air, where power meant survival. When that engine was fitted into the Mustang's airframe, everything changed. The aircraft suddenly had what it needed: power at altitude, efficiency over distance, and the ability to fight where the war actually lived. Combined with its laminar flow wing, which reduced drag and extended range, the Mustang became something entirely new. Not just a fighter, not just an escort, but a long-range hunter. And when Packard began producing the Merlin engine in the United States, that advantage scaled rapidly. Now, it wasn't just a prototype or a limited deployment. It was everywhere. And it stayed. That was the difference. Before, German pilots had relied on one certainty: the escorts would turn back. No matter how dangerous they were, no matter how skilled the pilots, range would always force them away. The bombers would continue forward, alone. And that was when the Luftwaffe would strike. Carefully timed, precisely executed, brutally effective. But now, that certainty is gone. Because the Mustang does not turn back. It stays with the bombers. It moves ahead of them. It climbs above interception lanes. It attacks before the attack even begins. Weaver sees it unfolding in real time. The Bf-109 ahead is trying to recover position, climbing hard, attempting to regain the advantage it expected to have. But the timing is broken. The approach is disrupted. The fight has already begun, and not on German terms. Weaver rolls slightly, aligning his aircraft. He pushes forward. The Mustang accelerates cleanly, without hesitation, slicing through the thin air with a kind of precision that feels almost mechanical. There is no wasted motion, no delay, just speed, control, intent. He squeezes the trigger. The aircraft shudders as the .50 caliber machine guns fire, tracer rounds streaking forward in bright lines that vanish almost instantly into the glare. The distance is still long, the angle not perfect, but the message is clear. The Luftwaffe will not reach the bombers unchallenged. Around him, the same scene repeats again and again. Mustangs diving into German formations, breaking them apart before they can organize, forcing pilots to defend instead of attack, turning carefully prepared interceptions into fragmented, reactive engagements. And below it all, the bombers continue. That is what matters most. They do not scatter. They do not break formation. They hold their course. Because for the first time, deep inside enemy territory, the first blows are not landing on them. They are landing somewhere else. Inside the B-17, the waist gunner notices it. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually. Fewer fighters rushing straight at the formation, more movement above, more flashes of gunfire at a distance. The battle is still there, the danger is still real, but the timing has changed. And in war, timing is everything. Back in German briefing rooms, this change is beginning to surface in reports. Mustangs appearing deeper over the Reich. Interceptions disrupted earlier than expected. Escorts that do not turn back. At first, some dismiss it. Another Allied claim. Another overestimation. But pilots in the air do not have the luxury of denial. They see it. They feel it. They survive it. Or they don't. Weaver pulls up slightly, breaking off his attack as the German fighter dives away, trailing faint signs of damage. There is no time to chase too far. This is not about one victory. This is about control. He scans the sky again. More contacts, more movement. The fight is not over. But it is no longer the same fight. Above Germany, in the thin, freezing air, something fundamental has shifted. Not just in machines, not just in tactics, but in who controls the moment when battle begins. And for the men flying in the bombers below, that changes everything. The sky does not settle. It changes shape. Weaver steadies his Mustang after the first pass, his eyes moving constantly across the pale winter glare. At this altitude, the light is deceptive. Reflections off the canopy distort distance. Dark specks appear and disappear in the brilliance. But movement is what matters, and there is more of it now. Below, the bomber stream continues deeper into Germany. B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators hold their course in heavy, disciplined formation, their engines producing that deep, continuous thunder that seems to exist beneath everything else. The bombers are still advancing, still deliberate, still committed to the target ahead. But above them, the fight is changing again. Another group of German fighters is forming, higher this time, more controlled, more cautious. They have seen what happened to the first wave, and they are trying not to repeat the same mistake. Instead of rushing the bombers immediately, they hold their altitude and begin to shape a more careful approach, trying to recover the method that had served the Luftwaffe well for so long. Altitude, timing, surprise. For years, that had been enough. Weaver spots them first as faint silhouettes crossing the white glare at high 2 o'clock. They are still distant, but their pattern is clear. These are not scattered fighters improvising under pressure. These pilots are measuring the range, preserving speed, and waiting for the right moment to descend. He keys the radio, his voice short and controlled. Bandits, high 2 o'clock, multiple. The response is immediate. The Mustangs begin to move again, climbing to meet the threat before it can build momentum. There is no hesitation now. The earlier clash has already established the lesson of the day. Do not wait, do not surrender altitude, and do not let the Germans choose when the fight begins. Across the sky, the American fighters rise in coordinated arcs, spreading outward ahead of the bombers. What had started as escort has become something more active than that, a shifting perimeter, a forward screen, constantly adjusting to deny the Luftwaffe a clean attack lane. And for the German pilots climbing to intercept, that changes everything. In the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf 109, one pilot sees the Mustangs coming from above and ahead, not behind the bombers, not turning away, not fading back toward the coast, above, closing. This is not how the engagement is supposed to begin. He had expected the usual sequence: approach from altitude, dive into the formation, make one fast pass, then climb away before the defensive guns could settle on him. That had been the method. That had been the system. But the system is collapsing before he can use it. He banks hard to adjust his line. Too late. A Mustang drops across his intended path from above, forcing him to spoil the angle. The clean geometry of interception breaks apart in seconds. What should have been a calculated attack run becomes something more dangerous and far less predictable: a fight. Weaver sees one of the German fighters try to press on anyway, attempting to punch through the disruption and reach the bombers before the American screen fully closes. It is a bold decision and a costly one. A pair of Mustangs converges almost immediately. Gun flashes flicker in the thin air. The German aircraft rolls sharply away before it can even come properly within firing range of the bombers. Below, inside the B-17 formation, the effect is subtle but unmistakable. The first wave never fully arrives. The bomber crews had been conditioned to expect the rush of a head-on attack. Enemy fighters growing quickly from dots to shapes to full, screaming aircraft in just seconds. Men had learned to brace for that sight almost by instinct. But this time, the expected impact does not come. A waist gunner watches from his position, his .50 caliber machine gun still trained high, waiting for the attack that should already be unfolding in front of him. Instead, he sees distant flashes, fighters turning away, contrails twisting above and ahead of the formation rather than slashing directly through it. He does not relax. He does not lower the weapon. But something changes inside him all the same. Expectation gives way to uncertainty, and uncertainty, for a bomber crew deep over Germany, can mean survival. Back above, the fight spreads outward. The Mustangs are no longer reacting to German attacks after they begin. They are forcing decisions before those attacks can properly form. Some Luftwaffe pilots break away early rather than press through the American screen. Others try to regroup and find a cleaner approach. A few continue forward, determined to make contact with the bombers at any cost. But coordination is slipping. And without coordination, the Luftwaffe loses one of its greatest advantages. Weaver picks up another contact, this one diving toward the bombers in an attempt to salvage the original plan. He rolls after it, carefully managing his angle rather than rushing the shot. The P-51 responds cleanly, holding speed without feeling heavy or unstable. At this altitude, that matters. The Packard-built Merlin is still delivering power. There is no obvious fade, no hesitation in the aircraft's response. Built for this. He fires. Tracer rounds streak ahead, forcing the German pilot to break away just short of the bomber formation. The attack collapses before it truly begins. Below, the bombers continue, engines steady, formation intact. The mission moves forward not because the danger has disappeared, but because the danger is being pushed outward, away from the aircraft that matter most. Far beneath the fight, the landscape is beginning to sharpen through breaks in the cloud. Rivers, rail lines, factory districts. Germany, deeper than many of these American crews had ever flown while still under active fighter protection. Only weeks earlier, that would have seemed improbable. Now, it is reality, and the Luftwaffe is being forced to confront it in real time. Later, reports on the ground will try to explain the shift with technical language. Longer range, high-altitude performance, improved escort tactics. All of that is true. But in the air, none of it feels abstract. What matters is simple. The enemy is here when he is not supposed to be. The fight is beginning earlier than it used to, and control is no longer guaranteed. Weaver pulls up again as the current engagement starts to fragment. Some German fighters dive away. Others try to climb and regroup for another attempt. But the momentum has changed hands. The rhythm is broken. And once rhythm is lost in air combat, it is rarely recovered quickly. Around him, Mustangs reform loosely, still moving, still searching, still hunting ahead of the bomber stream. Deep over Germany, the Luftwaffe is meeting something more dangerous than a new fighter. It is meeting a new kind of air war. The sky is empty now. Not completely, but enough. The last contrails begin to fade, stretching into thin, broken lines that dissolve into the pale winter sky. The violence of the earlier hours lingers only in fragments, smoke trails, distant specks, the occasional flicker of movement far behind. For the first time since crossing into Germany, their breathing room. Weaver eases the Mustang into a steady cruising position, the aircraft settling into a smooth, controlled rhythm. The Merlin engine hums beneath him, no longer strained, no longer pushed to its limit, just steady. He scans the sky again. Habit, always habit. Because even when the fight is over, it never truly feels over. Below, the bomber formation stretches out slightly now, no longer compressed into the tightest defensive geometry. Aircraft that held rigid positions during the target run begin to relax spacing just enough to ease the strain of formation flying. Some planes are still damaged. One trails faint smoke. Another flies slightly lower than the rest. But they are still there, still moving, still together. That, more than anything, is what matters. Inside the B-17, the waist gunner finally shifts his stance, rolling his shoulders slightly, flexing stiff fingers inside thick gloves. The cold has worked its way in over the hours, through metal, through fabric, through bone. He glances upward again. The sky is clearer now. No immediate threats, no incoming shapes, no sudden movement demanding reaction. And yet, he keeps watching. Because that is what survival has taught him. Expect nothing, trust nothing, stay ready. But even with that instinct, something has changed. The edge of inevitability is gone. In its place, possibility. Above, the Mustangs remain, still flying cover, still present, all the way out, all the way back. Weaver looks down briefly at the bombers beneath him, then back to the horizon. There is no dramatic moment here, no single event that defines what has happened, just a realization, spreading slowly. This worked. Not perfectly, not without loss, but it worked. And that means it can be done again, and again, and again. Far behind them, over Germany, the Luftwaffe regroups. Aircraft land, engines cut. Pilots climb out of cockpits into the cold air, removing gloves, pulling off helmets, exchanging looks that say more than any report will. Something is wrong, not broken completely, but changing. The familiar pattern, the rhythm they had relied on, is no longer holding. They had climbed, they had positioned, they had prepared. And yet, the fight had started too early, too far out, before they were ready. Some will blame tactics, others will blame coordination. But the more experienced pilots understand, it is not just what they did, it is what they faced. The Mustangs, not at the edge, not briefly, but throughout, interfering, disrupting, denying control. That realization settles in quietly, but permanently, because once seen, it cannot be unseen. Back over the North Sea, the American formation continues its long journey home. The light is beginning to change now, the harsh brightness of midday softening slightly as time passes. Shadows stretch across the metal surfaces of the aircraft, giving them a different shape, a different presence. Fatigue sets in, not sudden, not overwhelming, but gradual. Pilots adjust their grip. Gunners shift their weight. Men who have been holding tension for hours begin, slowly, to release it. But they do not relax completely. Not yet. Because home is not reached until wheels touch the ground. Weaver checks his fuel again, still within limits, still enough. The aircraft has done everything asked of it, everything expected of it, and that, too, is part of the story. Because reliability, consistency, endurance, these are not dramatic qualities, but they decide wars. The coastline fades behind them, the open water stretches on, and ahead, England. Airfields waiting, debriefings waiting, numbers waiting. But what will be written in reports will not fully capture what happened in the air today. Because what changed cannot be reduced to statistics. It is something more subtle, more important. Control. Who has it, when it matters, and how long it can be held. Weaver keeps his eyes forward. The mission is ending, but the war is not. And what happened today will echo forward, into the next mission, and the one after that, and the one after that. Because the Luftwaffe will adapt. It has to. But so will the Americans. And now, they have something they did not have before. Reach, presence, and the ability to stay. The Mustang flies on, and with it, a new kind of war. The airfields emerge slowly from the haze. At first, just faint shapes against the pale English countryside. Then runways, hangars, lines of waiting ground crews. The world below returns, solid and familiar, after hours spent suspended in cold air and uncertainty. Inside the bombers, something begins to release. Not all at once, but enough. Men shift in their positions. Shoulders drop. Hands loosen from grips that have been held too tight for too long. Some glance across the aircraft. Quick, silent acknowledgments that need no words. They made it back. Not all of them, but enough. Above, the Mustangs begin to separate from the formation. One by one, they peel away, some dropping altitude immediately, others circling wide before aligning for landing. The tight, protective structure that had held together over Germany slowly dissolves into individual aircraft again. The mission is ending. Weaver reduces throttle slightly, guiding his Mustang into a controlled descent. The Merlin engine responds with the same smooth consistency it had delivered at altitude. No hesitation, no weakness, just steady power from beginning to end. He glances once behind him. The sky is clear, no contrails, no distant shapes, no pursuit. For the first time since crossing into enemy territory, there is nothing there. The fight is over. For today. But even as that thought settles in, something else takes its place. This was not just another mission. It was a change. Not loud, not obvious, but real. Because what happened in the sky over Germany does not stay there. It carries forward, into the next briefing room, into the next flight plan, into every decision made by both sides. On the American side, the conclusions will be clear. The escort stayed. The bombers were protected deeper than before. Interceptions were disrupted earlier. Losses reduced. Not eliminated, but reduced. And in war, that difference matters. Because if something works, it will be repeated. Again, and again, and again. The bombers will go further. The Mustangs will go with them. And the pressure will not stop at the edges of the Reich. It will move inward, relentlessly. On the German side, the realization will come more slowly, but it will come. The old rhythm is no longer reliable. The timing is broken. The certainty, gone. They will try to adapt. They must. New tactics, different approaches, attempts to regain control of when and how the battle begins. But adaptation requires time, and time is no longer on their side. Because every mission like this one costs something. Aircraft lost. Fuel burned. Pilots, experienced pilots, gone. And experience is not easily replaced. Not in the air. Not in war. Weaver lowers the landing gear. The aircraft shudders slightly as the mechanism locks into place. The ground rises steadily to meet him. After hours of chaos, everything narrows into something simple. Speed, angle, control. He aligns the Mustang with the runway. The wheels touch. A brief jolt runs through the airframe. Then the aircraft rolls forward, slowing, steady, alive. Behind him, more aircraft land. One after another. Bombers, fighters, machines returning from a sky that had been filled with fire only hours before. Engines begin to wind down. The sound fades. And in that quiet, something becomes clear. This is how wars change. Not in a single moment, not in a single battle, but in shifts like this, where one side gains something the other cannot immediately answer, where control moves, gradually, then suddenly. The Mustang did not end the war, but it changed it. It erased distance. It removed isolation. It turned Escort into something more than protection. It turned it into control. And for the Luftwaffe, that change meant something far more dangerous than a single defeat. It meant fighting a war where the advantage no longer belonged to them. Weaver climbs out of the cockpit, boots hitting the cold ground. The air smells of oil, fuel, and winter. Around him, other pilots do the same. No celebration, no shouting, just quiet recognition. They know something happened today, even if they cannot yet measure it. Above them, the sky is empty again. But it is not the same sky they left that morning, and it never will be. The sky grows quieter, not silent, but different. The intensity of the earlier battle fades, replaced by distance and space between aircraft. The bombers continue west in steady formation, engines droning, while the Mustangs remain above, still alert, still scanning, but no longer reacting every second. For now. Weaver adjusts to the new rhythm, eyes moving constantly between horizon, instruments, and sky. Habit. Because even when the fight drifts away, it never truly ends. Behind them, the Luftwaffe still exists. But something has changed. This is no longer just one mission. It is a pattern. And in war, patterns have consequences. Before, German pilots controlled the timing. They chose when to engage, when to strike, and how to concentrate their force. Now, that control is slipping. The Mustangs force them to fight earlier, before they are ready, before formations are set, before timing is secured. And that changes everything. Fuel is burned too soon. Attacks are broken before they begin. Opportunities are lost before they form. Over time, the cost builds. Sorties increase, fuel drains, aircraft and pilots are lost, not just in combat, but in disruption. The Luftwaffe is still dangerous, but now it is being stretched. Weaver checks his fuel, still good. That is the difference. because now the escort stays for the entire mission. There is no gap, no moment where the bombers are truly alone, and without that moment, German tactics begin to fail. Below, a damaged bomber struggles to hold formation. Once, it would have been isolated and destroyed. Now, it is protected. Any attacker must pass through the Mustang screen first, and many choose not to. This is attrition in a different form, not destruction, denial. Fewer attacks, fewer chances, less damage. Weaver spots a distant German fighter, watching, not committing. That hesitation matters, because it means the risk has changed. The fight is no longer predictable. The Mustang has introduced uncertainty, and uncertainty breaks initiative. The German turns away. No attack, no pursuit, just retreat. The formation continues west. The danger fades, not completely, but enough to feel. Inside the bombers, tension loosens. Men shift, check equipment, and count the aircraft still flying beside them. Losses remain, they always do, but now they are fewer. And that difference matters, because wars are not won in moments, they are worn down, through pressure, through repetition, through the steady loss of advantage. And high above Europe, that process has begun, not through a single victory, but through a shift in who controls the sky and when. Weaver looks ahead. The horizon is clear, the formation steady, the aircraft reliable. And in that, there is something new, not certainty, but momentum. And momentum in war becomes power. Behind them, the Luftwaffe prepares for the next fight, but the conditions have changed, because the enemy they now face does not leave. The coast begins to appear, faint at first, a thin line between land and sea, barely visible through the haze. For the men in the bombers, it is more than geography. It is a threshold. Cross it, and the odds change. Not safety, never safety, but survival becomes more likely. Inside the B-17, the waist gunner watches that distant line in silence. No one speaks. No one needs to. Everyone understands what it means. Behind them, Germany. Ahead, the road home. Above, Weaver keeps scanning the sky, because even now, the fight is not completely over. A few German fighters remain, far off, distant shapes that follow but do not close. Watching, not committing. The Luftwaffe is still there, but it no longer presses the attack. Not with the same certainty, not with the same control. Weaver studies them briefly, then looks forward. They're finished. For now. Whether it is fuel, position, or timing, the attacks have stopped. And that, more than anything, confirms it. Something has changed. The formation crosses the coastline. Below, the sea stretches out, dark, endless, broken only by faint shipwakes far beneath the clouds. The air feels different, not calmer, but lighter, as if the weight of what was behind them is finally lifting. Inside the bombers, tension begins to ease, slowly. Men shift, adjust gloves, lower shoulders that have been tight for hours. No one celebrates, but the silence has changed. The worst is over. For this mission. Above them, the Mustangs remain, still flying cover, still scanning, still there. All the way home. And that is the proof, because this had never been possible before. Not this deep, not for this long. But now it is. Weaver checks his fuel again, still within margin, still enough. The Merlin engine hums steadily, no drop, no weakness, just constant, reliable power. And in war, consistency matters. Behind them, the Luftwaffe turns back, not destroyed, not defeated in a single battle, but changed, because the reality they face is no longer the one they prepared for. They can still fight, still intercept, still inflict damage, but they no longer control the engagement. They can no longer rely on distance. They can no longer wait for the bombers to be alone, because that moment no longer comes. And that realization spreads from pilot to pilot, from report to report, from experience to certainty. The Mustang is not just another aircraft. It is the end of a system, the end of a rhythm that once defined the air war over Europe. And once that rhythm is broken, it does not return. The bombers continue west, formation steady, engines constant, carrying damage, loss, exhaustion, and something else. Proof. Proof that Germany is no longer out of reach. Proof that distance no longer protects it. Proof that the war has changed. Weaver levels out, settling into the long flight home. There will be reports, numbers, debriefings, but none of them will fully capture what happened here, because what changed was not just tactical, it was fundamental. Who controls the sky, and when? And for the first time, deep over Germany, that control no longer belongs to the Luftwaffe. The Mustangs fly on, and beneath them, the bombers follow, together, all the way home.